If there's one single kind of motorcycle sure to sell well, it's a well-executed retro bike. And yet so many of the major manufacturers have completely neglected this segment. Sure, they'll take the fairing off of a sport bike and maybe throw on a round headlight, but that's not what I'm talking about. And frankly, that's just not what retro bike enthusiasts really want. We want motorcycles that truly feel classic and timeless and maybe even feel a little more handcrafted. Bikes that really do point back to the iconic motorcycles of old. Now, I like to think that my videos are meant to stir up discussion, and I personally think that I have one of the most vibrant comment sections probably in all of motorcycle YouTube. So feel free to let us know down below if there's any classic bikes that you would like to see make a comeback. Now, speaking of retro motorcycles, I'm really excited to share something with you guys. This is something I've been working on for about 5 months. This isn't an ad, so you don't have to skip ahead. So for the longest time, I've been looking for children's books to read to my kids that sort of capture the spirit behind riding a motorcycle, and that will maybe, make them want to ride someday as well. And I've been looking for a book that featured an actual story that kids would like. So I decided to write it. So if you guys have kids or grandkids or nieces or nephews, or if you like the idea of just reading a children's story featuring a motorcycle, or if you want to just support the channel, check out the link in the description below to get my brand new book, Wolf and His Motorbike. And if you enjoy it, leave a review on Amazon, as that really does help a ton. All right, without further ado, let's jump back in and look at 10 classic motorcycles that need to make a comeback. First on our list is a 350cc retro twin from Triumph, something very much like the original Tiger 350 or Tiger 90 as it was called. Something that is like the Tiger 90 in the fact that that bike was a cool, fast, small version of their bigger sporting twins. We need a Triumph today that has that beautiful retro styling but is smaller and more affordable. Ditch all the riding modes, ditch the expensive electronics, and just make a true competitor to bikes like the classic 350 and the Meteor 350. Make it have a smaller gas tank and just make it classic. I think it would sell really well and could sell well worldwide. Let's call it a baby Bonneville. Maybe make it, a little over $5,000. Great retro styling, like 35 horsepower. It would sell like absolute hotcakes. But make it in-house, make it a real Triumph. I don't want to see a project like this to be just shipped out to some other company. No, re-engineer that twin setup to be smaller, lighter, and have it just have an attractive, lightweight package. I think it would work even here in the United States where we think that only big bikes sell. Make it a baby Bonneville. Yeah, bring it on. Next up, I'm thinking BMW brings back a version of the R80 GS. Now, I know the GS line still exists and does point back in its own heritage to this iconic bike, but for me, I'm thinking a retro sort of adventure bike that's really styled after the original R80 GS. I also know that BMW does have a version of the R9T that is sort of styled after the R80 GS. Again, that's really not what I'm thinking. I want a true adventure bike from BMW that is retro. And in the same way all of these new Dakar-inspired adventure bikes like the T7 and the Ducati Desert X, and of course the Aprilia Touareg, they're all pointing back to these old Dakar desert sort of racing bikes. Well, BMW could have a really cool, unique take on, say, a middleweight adventure bike and what it could look like, and just make it look like the original R80 GS because that's such a cool bike. So there's mine for BMW. Now, I'm not doing this for every manufacturer. These are 10 random bikes that I'd like to see brought back. But anyways, for Moto Guzzi, I would love to see them bring back the iconic Le Mans. This is one of the most beautiful and also one of the most incredible Moto Guzzis of all time. The time is now to make retro Italian sport bikes. Everybody's doing it. Heck, Triumph is even making a sport bike that looks like an old Italian race bike. Moto Guzzi could have a really cool take on this, utilize their new liquid-cooled platform, maybe focus, more on revs and performance, and again, style it at least somewhat after this amazing sport bike from the 70s from Moto Guzzi. It's kind of a cool, odd cafe racer. Obviously, that style is in at this point. I think Moto Guzzi could really pull it off well. Maybe it wouldn't sell in droves, but it could be a really cool model for them. Number 7 goes to the iconic Honda CB350. Much like Triumph, I think a lightweight, true retro bike made to look like the iconic CB350 from the early 70s. I think it would be a total hit for Honda. Of course, Honda does now have the Honda CB350 RS, but that's not available here, and it's also not really a retro bike. Like, it doesn't at all look like the original CB350. These small CBs from the 70s are some of the most beautiful but simple bikes that Honda has ever made, and honestly, it's time Honda actually enter the retro bike market. I know they have the Grom and the Super Cub, and sure, the CL500 is retro-esque, but honestly, it's not really. I'm thinking a CB350 or even a CB450, keep it in twin configuration, make it air-cooled, something for Honda to have that competes with Royal Enfield in this market. They could make it affordable and they would sell a ridiculous amount if they did it right. Now, I know this just doesn't really fit well with Honda's overall strategy. Honda is a company that looks forward and pushes the boundary, but motorcycling as a whole really is changing. Riders are less interested in tech-heavy, performance-oriented bikes. Basic, fun, simple, great-looking motorcycles that are reliable, like the original CB350, these are the kind of bikes that are selling like hotcakes, and I think Honda should get on that. Number 6 on my list, the MV Agusta F4. Either the original F4 750, though I don't see that happening, but just bringing back the F4 in general, even in that 1000cc form, would be awesome. Take that ridiculous inline-4 engine that is already based on the original F4, crank up the power, make it a flagship model again, maybe a rework of the styling, as that bike, up until it was discontinued recently, well, it's an old design dating all the way back to the late 90s. But that's what makes it so great. It's kind of timeless at this point. I know this probably isn't a winning proposition for MV Agusta. I just want him to do it because it would be cool. I want him to bring back a big leader bike that's just effortlessly the fastest thing in the world. I think that would be awesome. For number 5, hear me out here, I think that Yamaha should bring back the RD350. Now, you might be seeing a trend here. I wish these big manufacturers would wise up to the fact that small motorcycles can work, and I know many manufacturers sell smaller motorcycles in much of Asia where those markets fit better with smaller bikes, but for the Western markets, really classically styled bikes like the RD350, I think would do well. Now, the only problem is that the RD350 is a 2-stroke, and the odds of Yamaha just dropping a 2-stroke street bike on us, yeah, that's not going to happen. I personally don't care too much what configuration it is. I just want to see Yamaha make a good retro bike. None of these neo-retro bikes. I just don't think those are really capturing anybody's imagination, but instead a proper, small, simple retro bike, again, to compete with Royal Enfield, because Royal Enfield is honestly the only company making these bikes in the West, and they are absolutely killing it everywhere in the world. So it's time companies like Yamaha and Honda jump on this sort of bandwagon and make a good small retro bike, and the RD350 would be a cool one. Number 4, I'm thinking Aprilia should bring back a small sport bike, and specifically the iconic RS250. Now, if you don't know, this was essentially a little race bike, but it wasn't a high-revving inline-4 like the Japanese were making at this time. It was a V-twin. In some ways, I'm just using this to say that I think it would be fun if either Ducati or Aprilia would just bring back a small, usable sport bike. I mean, the RS660 is not, it's a high-revving super sport, basically. It doesn't have to be a full-blown race bike like the RS250 was, but we've seen how well the R7 has done for Yamaha. How long has it been since a new beginner-friendly sport bike has come out that's made to really compete with, say, the Ninja 400 or Ninja 300? Most bikes in this class just aren't very compelling anymore, and Aprilia could be the company to make a little exotic Italian sport bike that would be really cool. All right, number 3, I am thinking an actual CB750 from Honda. I know there's the Hornet CB750 thing that's coming out or is already out, which, by the way, isn't really a Hornet or a CB750. I want Honda, again, as we've already said, to enter the retro market with a true retro, maybe keeping things in line with the CB750 lineage, with a nice detuned 750cc inline 4, again, maybe even air-cooled to make it sort of fit that look. A well-done, true retro CB750 would be absolutely fantastic. It would outperform most of the other retros in that class just by virtue of being an inline 4, but it wouldn't need to be crazy or high-tech, just a great-looking retro Honda. Again, it would be an absolute hit. I mean, think about all the people who rode CB750s that still ride, who would just be so tempted to get one. I think it's a good idea for Honda. Number 2 is for Indian, and specifically, I think that they should bring back a sort of Indian Junior Scout. The Scout Junior was basically a smaller version of the iconic Scout 101. So again, in that spirit, we're looking at a lot of smaller displacement machines, partially because older bikes just were smaller. So if you're going to bring back a classic, it's going to be a smaller bike than everything now, which is pretty much all at least 750 cc's. But yeah, it would be a smaller, more affordable, and maybe even more retro, true to the original design Scout. Indian only makes big, heavy bikes at this point, and I don't really get it. Bigger is not always better. And that's true of motorcycles too. The original Scout, not even the Scout Junior, was not a big, heavy cruiser. It was a lightweight sporting machine, one of the fastest motorcycles in the world. So come on, Indian, give us a smaller, lighter weight Scout, or just any motorcycle that's just smaller and more affordable instead of all large, pretty expensive premium bikes. And, give it that original retro styling. I'm sorry, but the Scouts today, they look nothing like the original Scout, and I don't love it. But yeah, Indian Junior Scout. That's what I'm thinking. All right, last on our list, I want Honda to bring back the original SL175. So hear me out. My proposition is that we take this whole retro idea and concept, but bring it to the off-road segment. I know scramblers exist, and I know now we've got all these Dakar-looking bikes, and scramblers are often inherently retro, but not a scrambler. The original SL175 was sort of an enduro. So make an enduro that looks not really like an enduro from the 80s or 90s, but more this awesome time when dirt bikes were just kind of figuring their own world out, and they just looked weird and cool. The SL75 is the perfect bike for it. Now, they weren't really good at a whole lot. They were pretty heavy and cumbersome and not that great off-road and not that great on-road, but even when they came out, they were kind of a styling exercise. I think that a retro dirt bike in the spirit of the SL175 could be really cool. All right, guys, there you have it. 10 classic motorcycles that I think need to make a comeback. As always, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And if you guys want to support the channel, again, check out my book, Wolf and His Motorbike. Link in the description. Thanks for watching, guys. Ride safe.